Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. Quilting may be slow, but sometimes you only have a weekend or a few days to get one together. And I've done it, so I have a lot to say about it. Making a quick quilt is an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp. They are the opposite. Quilting is not quick. Quilting is slow. But sometimes we have a quilting deadline, like you've got a baby shower coming up and you need to make a baby quilt. Or maybe you found out that your friend is starting chemotherapy and you want to make them a lap quilt for their treatments. In those situations, we find ourselves perhaps with a weekend and really needing to do, ideally a whole quilt. While that seems like not the way to approach quilting, some of us find ourselves in that spot. Or maybe you just have a full-time job and the only time that you have is on the weekend. Making those quilts over a weekend, it happens. I recently made a video called Quilt in a Weekend. And what I discovered is it can be done beginning to end, from cutting all the way to binding, but it requires a lot of planning and thoughtfulness and choices. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, because sometimes we jump in with our Labor Day weekend with the goal of having a quilt at the end of it, or maybe you're going on a retreat and you want a whole quilt. And if the planning hasn't been done, it's not going to be successful. So I'd just like to walk you through some considerations that will help you along the way on your weekend quilting. First and foremost, make a wise pattern choice. It sounds so obvious, but that single decision really is going to make the difference between whether you have an enjoyable and quick process and whether you have lots of time invested and perhaps a lot of frustration. So in my experience, one of the things that can really help you is either to make a quilt that you've made before that you know you can do successfully and quickly, or B, choose a pattern that is very simple in construction. What I mean by that is you may see a pattern that you love and it looks beautiful, but it's going to require sewing and then cutting and then trimming and then sewing again and then cutting and trimming. Those multi-step blocks really don't lend themselves to quick construction. And just because something is simple does not mean that it is not lovely. Look at a basic 9-patch quilt sometime. They really come together quickly and they're beautiful. I made a gingham 9-patch that I was shocked at how quickly it came together and was just delighted with how lovely it was. You might also consider a St. Louis 9-patch or an Irish chain with just a single chain. Another quilt pattern to consider would be one that's jelly roll friendly or a jelly roll race. I've made a jelly roll friendly quilt called the Birch Point quilt, which came together so fast, I just couldn't believe it. So if you've made a quilt that you enjoyed, that you thought, gosh, that quilt top came together quickly, that would be a perfect option for your quilt in a weekend, or I've got to get this done right now quilt. So putting that pattern choice in your favor with simple construction, not a lot of elaborate or involved sewing, is going to really help you out in the long run. Next up is your fabric choice. Now, there's both the type of fabric and the color of fabric to consider. So, of course, I use a lot of shirts. It's kind of my thing. There are different types of shirts, and the easier choice would be 100% cotton that is similar to or identical to the weight of a quilting cotton. And then that way you don't have to do a lot of prep. You don't have to use a lot of starch typically. And it just sews pretty predictably. If you were to go with another type of fabric like flannel or linen or a heavier weight fabric, even like denim, that's going to require you to do some fabric prep. So starch, maybe interfacing, or trying to match up fabrics that have a similar weight. So whatever you choose, just know your choices will require you perhaps to do additional preparation of the fabric itself as you go into your planning your quilt. Additionally, choosing a colorway, I mean, that alone for some people is just a really big hurdle. You can put things in your favor by limiting the number of fabrics that you use or colors that you use. So, for example, an Irish chain that's 2 colors, all of a sudden you're not cutting 6, 7, 8 types of fabric. It's just those 2 colors. So that can eliminate some work in your actual quilting that maybe will save you some time. Or perhaps you go with a color wash sort of colorway or fabric choices. When you have that situation, it requires less of your brain, honestly, and can kind of put things in your favor. So in my Quilts in a Weekend, I chose that latter. I did a roughly like sea glass colored choices in linen. And so they were blues and greens, and it just didn't require a lot when it came time to start putting it to cutting and putting it together because everything was already in the same family. It helps on the back end with the design of the quilt. So for example, if you're making blocks and you have all of these really fun but disparate colors, when you go to arrange them on your design wall, oh gosh, I don't want this color next to this color. This one is too bright. This one is too muted. And it can make your arranging of your blocks or rows take more time. So if you have a lot of similar colors or just 2 colors, it eliminates time in the design wall aspect of your quilt. That is a consideration and really might save you some time just working with a limited color palette. While you're in consideration of your colorway, just go ahead and make up your mind about your binding and backing as well. What that does is it allows you to think of the whole quilt in total. And if you need to purchase or prepare fabric for your backing or your binding, that's now in the decision-making process so that when it comes time, you don't have a beautiful quilt top and now you get to the point it's like, now what? And it's Labor Day weekend and nothing's open and you can't go buy binding or backing that you want. So if you make all those decisions together, not only is your quilt going to probably look more cohesive and thoughtful, you also just have that opportunity to purchase or prepare all of that fabric in advance so that when you are really ready, set, go, you're done and ready. The next step is make sure you have all the materials that you need and order them or purchase them right now. The biggest offender for me, at least, is batting. So I've made my decision about my pattern, my colorway, my fabric, my binding, and my backing. And now it's time to decide what kind of batting I want. Some of you have lots of batting choices already in your house. I am not one of those people. What I tend to do is I get all the way to the end where I have a completed quilt top, and now I'm on Missouri Star or Fat Quarter Shop or Diane's Sewing Room or whatever, and I'm trying to buy batting, and now I have to wait 7 to 10 days. If I'm making a baby quilt for a baby shower, yikes, that's cutting it close. So basically, almost at the moment that you've decide on your backing fabric, your binding, and your colors of your quilt top, just go on and order your batting or zip by the, local fabric store or your big box craft store on your way home from work one night and get your batting, and then it's done. And while we're talking about getting your materials, it's so easy to slip up and not realize, oh, I don't have the right thread. And you don't know a lot of times until it's time to sit down and sew. It's like, wait, I'm out of white thread. How am I out of white thread? While you're ordering or purchasing your batting, check your sewing room for extra needles, new rotary blades, the thread that you want to use. Do you have enough quilting pins, safety pins, to do your pin basting? You would think that would be so obvious, but I promise you, I have been in the middle of pin basting and run out of pins. And there's nothing more infuriating than having that momentum and time set aside. And you're sitting in the middle of your floor doing your pin basting, and now you have to get up, put regular outdoor clothes on, go get in the car and drive yourself to Joann's to buy quilting pins, when a little bit of forethought would have saved that effort. I don't know about you, but if I have to make a run to the fabric store, I'm just blown 2 hours, and I'm 10 minutes away from my fabric store. It eats up time anytime you have to stop what you're doing to go purchase materials. So check all of your materials and go on and get everything in your favor, and maybe even weeks in advance, but for sure several days before you're getting ready to actually pull the plug and start your process. You may have all of your materials, but they may not be in the best shape. I heard someone say, if you can't remember the last time you changed your needle on your sewing machine, it's time to change the needle on your sewing machine. And I contend that the same is true for a rotary cutter. I actually am looking at my rotary cutter right now and realizing I can't remember the last time I changed the blade on my rotary cutter. I'm looking at it going, oh man, why have I been cutting with this dull blade? And I actually left out my little snips here as a reminder. I love these snips. I think we have a link to them in the description. They're actually Tula Pink snips. Paul bought these for me, and I use them constantly. I also keep them on my ironing board, which means I'm constantly knocking them off, and they hit the floor, and my previous pair had gotten so banged up and dull that it was not actually snipping. My snips were not snipping, or at least not effectively. And so I would snip, wait, I didn't get it, snip, wait, okay, all right, now I got the part where the blades are lined up. Now is a great time to replace anything that's not working for you. If your pins are all bent up, if your snips aren't snipping, if your ironing board needs to be cleaned, if your starch jar is empty, it's a great time. You're already ordering and buying batting. You're already replacing your needles. If you have backup needles, you may discover you don't. It's a great time to polish up and shine up and get really effective tools so that when those times come when you need them, they do what you need. Also, while we're here, through the week as you're leading into your quilt in a weekend, one of those evenings after you get home from work and before you go to bed, clean your machine. Take off the plate, get a little paintbrush and dust off all the dust. Take your presser foot off, get the paintbrush, brush that off, oil your machine. Do not use oil that's not made for your machine. Get sewing machine oil and oil your machine and just get everything slicked up and ready to go. First of all, your machine will thank you because you're about to put it through its paces. But also, things that are cared for and maintained run better and save time. So everything about this preparing for that quilt in a weekend, you've got to do things quickly, and you don't need your machine to talk back to you. So get it together, order what you need, get your machine clean and oiled and ready, and that eliminates a whole world of problems that you couldn't even see coming. And while we're talking about cleaning and prepping, it's really a great idea to take a look at your sewing area. And if you can, now, not all of us have the space or the time, but if you can put away existing projects, even if you just tuck them into a closet for the weekend, clean your area, put all your things away that aren't going to be the project you're working on. I don't know about you, but if I have a lot of clutter, it's evidence that I've been creating and making, but it's also sometimes a visual burden, and I can get distracted. I mean, I'll be working on a completely different project and go, oh, I also need a chain piece. And the next thing I know, I've got 4 projects that I'm working on all at the same time, which is not what you want when you're trying to get a deadline done. If you're trying to get that baby quilt done before the shower, you don't need to be sewing your sister's linen quilt that isn't even due anytime soon. Take a look at your environment. Do you have your machine set up in a way that's going to work? Do you have a trash can nearby? While we were talking about snips, it made me think they go on my ironing board, which I'm gesturing to, and it's not there. Good grief. And I have a set of snips that I keep right next to my machine because they're just things you need to snip next to your machine. But there are also things you need to snip next to your while you're pressing. Likewise, I have a pin bowl that I keep on my cutting table because there are things you need to pin shortly after you have cut them. But also I need a little pin bowl, and I do have one next to my machine as I'm pulling the pins out from my sewing. So it's okay to have duplicate things if you're going to use them there. And in fact, doing so will keep you from having to, where was that pin bowl again? Where are my pins? Where's that set of snips? Get 2 and have one next to your sewing machine and one on your ironing board. And it will really put things in your favor. So there's this concept of, in the video world, of redundancy. For example, I have on a lav mic and we have a little boom mic above me so that if this one that's hidden in my shirt fails, the one above me will still get the sound and we don't have to re-record the video. So for example, snips in 2 places, pins in 2 places, and having multiple bobbins pre-wound can really be a lifesaver because there is nothing worse than losing bobbin chicken where you're just trying to run that bobbin out and you sew 50 feet worth of things with no bobbin thread in it, and then having to stop, unthread your machine and wind bobbins. I mean, rage like bottomless pit of rage if you have to stop what you're doing to wind bobbins. So while you've got the plate off of your sewing machine and you're doing all the cleaning and the oiling and the slicking up and the shining and whatever else, wind some bobbins. If you're doing a lot of sewing and you're going to sew a whole quilt on a weekend, you're probably going to use up a whole bobbin. And if you have one at the ready, it's like someone has given you a gift. That is definitely something that you can put in your favor. Now, I realize this is a lot of all in advance, but the all in advance means that when you get to that Saturday morning that you're going to start working on your quilt, all that's been done. And Saturday morning you is going to love work week you. Think of your future self and with love for that person in your heart, go on and do all this so that the Saturday morning sewing you just gets to enjoy the process. One of the things you can do to really help yourself on your quilting weekend is remove all of the decisions that are not about quilting. So that's what you're going to eat for that day and maybe the next day. And if it's a holiday weekend, the day after that. Go to the grocery store and get food that's easily preparable or make meals in advance so that you don't do that thing that we all do, which is sew all morning and then now it's 1:30. You're starving. You've just had to seam rip the last 16 seams because you're hungry and tired and you don't know what to eat. And now you've got to not only figure out what to eat, but also either make it or order it. So if you can do those things that you need in life. It's really such a self-care thing. So it's decide what you're going to eat or how you're going to make meals or order food or whatever that is. In our situation with the Quilt in a Weekend, I went on and did laundry, like the whole, well, Paul and I together. I washed and he managed to get it to the next step and folded and put away. So I started the process, but we did all our laundry for the week. So, I'm not digging through the laundry basket for socks the morning that I'm, trying to figure out how to do a whole quilt in a weekend. Now, we did have the videoing to do, which added an additional layer, but anything that you can do to take away other decisions is just going to reward you. And that's even like, how long is the cutting going to take? So if it's going to take a couple of hours, you probably need to take a restroom break, a water break, and maybe even a snack break. So you could just go on and factor that stuff in and write it down, because anything that you can get out of your head and onto paper is going to help you. If you know that you can't sit at your sewing table for more than 45 minutes, that's part of your process. And so you write that down, 45 minutes. Set a timer, take a break. It makes it so much less stressful because you're not trying to force yourself to get through with something when you know this is really my limit. To that point of writing things down, when I did the Quilt in a Weekend, I used all shirts. Not everybody does that, obviously, but it can add an additional layer of time and effort, and fabric prep. So the week, actually 2 weeks before we did that video, I starched all my fabric. Well, I broke down the shirts in advance. So that is the thing. Like, okay, I'm going to use that shirt, and then get your scissors and rip it out the morning of. That takes time. Even that little bit of just cutting the back out of a shirt, for example. Break down your shirts, do your starch if you need to, whatever fabric prep you need, including ironing your pieces if you need to. And then I made a cutting guide because I did not want to have to keep going back to the pattern to review. Wait, how many of these do I need? How many did I say I could get out of this shirt? How many of this navy blue am I going to need? So I just put together, I had read through the pattern, also advisable. I had made the pattern as well. I looked at the pattern the night before just to refresh and make sure I knew where I was going with it. Because of that, I just went on and made myself a cutting guide. So for example, light blue shirt, 5 pieces of 6-inch blocks. I just did every shirt that way and wrote it down on my guide and taped it up to the wall right next to my cutting station. So I would pull out a shirt, look at the cutting guide. Oh, I need 5 6-inch blocks. Doom, doom, doom. Check it off. Such a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. And I didn't have to continually go back to that digital PDF that I have the pattern in. For those of you that use paper, it might be easier for you to just use your paper pattern and check it off as you go. For those of us that are very computer driven, that's a pain. Get out the laptop, type in the password. So anything that you can do to get that out of holding space in your head so that you can just check it off and keep rolling is going to help you in your time management. So you've now done all of your fabric prep and cut your pieces. And so it's time to sew, which is most of our favorite part. But you can actually help yourself even in the sewing part by having yourself organized, your pieces together, and a sense of the order that you're going to do it and how to make that work beautifully. So there are some things you cannot rush. You should not and cannot rush. You cannot make pieces get sewn faster than you can sew them. It just takes time. But what I found in that Quilt in a Weekend was we had a little rolling cart that our daughter brought home from college, and none of us thought we would use it. We were like, oh boy, this is one more thing. And what I discovered is by having this little rolling cart beside me, I put my pieces on the cart, and then it didn't take up my sewing area. I wasn't constantly knocking things off, and I could just reach and sew, which is why I have these little pieces here as just a reminder of how easy it is if you just have stuff stacked up and ordered. Doesn't have to necessarily be labeled as long as it's accessible. I don't know about you, but sometimes I think, oh, I've got my, for example, backing taken care of. I know what I'm going to use. So let me give you an example of that. Here's a sheet that I'm going to use for backing for a project. I have ripped the seams, so it's all ready to go. Except you may be able to tell just at a glance, this is not ready to go. There are threads all along the edge. It has not been pressed, and it has not been cut to the size that I need for the back of the quilt. In my head, this is ready. It's not ready. When you're thinking through your sewing process, please include, I need to press my backing, or I need to stitch my backing pieces together, because those all are things that add in time. Just like my batting, which I have here on my rolly cart, I have my batting. I'm ready to go. In prep for this video, I was actually going to take the batting out and show you, and I struggled over the package so much that I gave up on it and decided this is actually makes my point. This is not ready to go. I need to cut the package open, get the batting out, maybe run it in the tumble dryer for a few minutes to soften those hard creases and make sure it is the proper size. Those things take time. Open your batting package, press your backing seams, whatever those things are, so that when you sit down to sew, you can sew in a way that's really productive and enjoyable. So your quilt blocks are sewn together and ready to be put into the ultimate quilt top. But first you have to put them somewhere to arrange them. So that can be a really big time suck, and it's for a variety of reasons. For example, you may have to use your floor as your design wall, but you need to vacuum your carpet and move 3 chairs in order to do so. Or perhaps you use your bed as your, spread it out and do the design. But you haven't made the bed and you forgot that you dumped the laundry from the dryer in the middle of the bed to fold later. I'm sure none of you do that. Those are considerations. Even if you have a dedicated design wall, it's the sort of thing that once you start arranging, lots of us get sucked into, no, that's not right. No, that's not right. And then an hour later, it's no different, but we really feel like we've made real headway. For that, I would suggest 2 things. Get yourself an excellent timer. I love this one. You don't have to get this one. Obviously, you can use your microwave or you can use your smartphone. There's something about the visual of seeing it sitting there, reminding you that your time is ticking down. It forces you to make decisions. Set a timer so that you don't burn precious time moving blocks around in a way that ultimately maybe no one would even notice. As you're putting your blocks on your wall, already have your system for how you're going to label your rows. That can be a set of Post-its and a good pencil or pen or Sharpie, row 1, and stick them and keep rolling. I have used Post-its before. I don't love them. Sometimes they don't stick. There are all sorts of fancy labels and pens. And in fact, I'm thinking about making some DIY pens for row lettering and numbering. You didn't ask for that. I have discovered if you don't want to have to do all of that, but you have a bunch of pens, at my last project, I discovered I needed to label, and I didn't have any of those things nearby. So I just used my pens and made Roman numerals. So row 1 was just 1 pen. Row 2 was 2 pens. And when I got to row 5, I made the little V. And then when I got to row 10, I made the little X. I can't help it. I'm super nerdy. Anything that you can do to give yourself a visual clue. This is row 1. this is row 2. That way, when you're going back and forth between your design wall or your bed or floor to your sewing area, you don't lose your way and end up in your rush getting things out of order and then having to seam rip, which is definitely not what you want to do when you're trying to quilt quickly. So we did talk about making a plan to take breaks, but this is a great time, just as a reminder, quilting can be hard. Sewing can be hard on our bodies. So anything that you can do to factor in that fact and counteract that. So take a break and do a little yoga, set your little timer and get up and walk around the house, make a cup of tea. Those are things that will pay back dividends in your energy. If you watch that quilt on a weekend, you'll know toward the end, I was wiped. I just was really spent. And part of that was I was making a quilt in a weekend and also on camera for all of it, but it is physically demanding. And so the things that you can do to put it in your favor with your body, so do some stretches, anything to take a break and make it where you can go the distance with your time and energy over your weekend quilting is worth it. The rest, as you know, is just doing the tasks. And those are things that you can't rush. You don't need to rush your pin basting or your glue basting or your sewing or your cutting. But those are things that will sort themselves out as you go. So it's really not rushing through the steps of quilting that makes you able to do it quickly and well. It's the planning and the thoughtfulness and your front end choices that really reward you in the end so that you can enjoy the process, enjoy your weekend quilting, and come away with a beautiful quilt done pretty quickly. I hope my experience with planning for a weekend quilt has been helpful for you, and I appreciate you being with me today. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thank you so much for watching.